everyone. I'm Ari here with Rachel, and we're your hosts for the Merry Writer podcast. This week, we're on episode 259, and we're asking, what do you need to consider when creating book covers? Before we start, if you enjoy the show, please do consider checking out our coffee page. You can follow the page for free, as we have plenty of goodies for all. If you're feeling generous, a one-off donation will get you access to even more treats, or you could become a Merry Writer for just $2 a month. For this, you get access to all the items in our shop, including exclusive goodies, as well as access to monthly bonuses, all while helping to support our podcast. If that's not your style, but you still enjoy the podcast, then please do consider subscribing wherever you're listening if you haven't already, and drop us a like over on YouTube. Before we begin, I do want to say that when we say with the title creating, it means getting it designed, because we really do believe that unless you are a graphic designer or have that kind of skill set, we highly recommend you commission one or you purchase a pre-made cover that you can then slightly amend. Throwing up your own cover if you've got no skill set in that way, not a good idea. And you can learn it. I mean, there's a number of authors who have recently started learning the concepts and like delving into making their own covers, but they're doing it a specific way. They're learning, they're doing tutorials, or they're going to classes. It's definitely not a just, I'm going to throw stuff up. Don't do that.
And I also just want to add that if you hire a book cover designer, that's their full-time job. They're keeping up with the trends of all the different book covers for each specific genre and things like that. So not only is it good to hire an actual graphic designer for your book cover, but to hire somebody who's already been working in the industry for a long time. You not only need to know design, you also need to know the trends and things like that. So just throwing that out there as well.
That's such a good point. I mean, this is why we have professional book cover artists. We have professional editors. They're there because, yes, while you can learn it yourself, you have to keep up with the industry. You have to keep up with the amount of knowledge. And sometimes it's nice to sort of delegate so you don't have to do that. But yeah, so book covers, let's be honest, it is the most important marketing tool we have at the very beginning. It is literally what will grab the reader's attention. I suppose with social media, you could put up like blurbs and everything. But if we're talking books on the shelf, books on Amazon, books that people are just scrolling through, because when you're launching a book or talking about a book, people have already found you. We're talking about catching people who have never heard of you. Maybe your book is in a store. Maybe it's on Amazon. Maybe it's on BookBub. So the book cover is going to grab the people who have never heard of you. That's why it's important. And honestly, you shouldn't scrimp. Unless you are just doing it for a hobby and you're not aiming for a writing career, in which case I think you can be a bit more flexible, but it really needs to stand out. And you have to think about it. It has to stand out amongst thousands of other books in the market, not just all the books out there, all the books in the niche that you're already in. So it's important. So I think the main thing for me with covers is you need to make certain things clear. That comes down to a few things. That would be age, tone. That's like, is it comedy, thriller, horror? Now I know that is genre, but obviously if you have a comedy horror or a kitschy romance, it's totally different than just romance or just horror. So tone, obviously the genre, and sometimes spice level can be important. Like if you're going to stick a shirtless guy on the front or a really passionate embrace of your characters on the front, you're going to get people expecting spice. And remember, not everyone's going to read through and check to see whether you've mentioned that they have that. So a cover can sort of portray a lot of that information depending on how you have it designed.
Yeah, those are definitely all good things to consider. And I will admit it's some of the things I didn't consider when I went through the cover design process for Apparitions Anonymous was tone and stuff. I just really didn't want the book cover to look horror-ish or thriller, because that's not what Apparitions Anonymous is. And I went through 99 designs and it asked me those specific questions in the brief. The brief was super detailed, that it helped me really narrow down my focus on what I wanted the book cover to look like, because I am not a graphic designer. So no, I didn't think of those things. And which is, again, why we say you should hire a graphic designer because they know these things. But also, age is super important too. And again, not something you would typically think about, because when you look at a book cover, I don't really look at a book cover and say, oh, wow, this is specifically for 38-year-olds. Like this looks like that type of cover. But when I was doing the Apparitions Anonymous process, somebody had sent me a concept which I really liked, to be brutally honest. It was a really good cover, but I looked at it and I was like, this is a middle grade book. And Apparitions Anonymous is not a middle grade book. And it's just, you have to think outside the box pretty much. And I don't think a lot of like readers, when they look at book covers, I don't know if they even look at book covers and think of that stuff, or if they're just like, oh, this is pretty. Because for me, I see book covers and I'm like, oh, this is pretty and it's shiny. Let me see what it's about. But I'm sure that there are readers out there that actually like think more in depth about what the book cover is trying to tell them, because a picture's worth 1,000 words. So the book cover should pertain to the book and pertain to the audience and the tone, or set the tone, I mean, and so on and so forth.
I think you hit the nail on the head with that. Like you said, like, yeah, you don't think, oh, this book is for this or that, but you could instantly tell if something felt middle grade, or if it feels a bit YA, or if it feels a bit like, wow, that's right at the top of like the horror genre. There's a part of you that could automatically tell from whatever design it is, whether it's the font, whether it's the color scheme, whether it's the image. And it doesn't have to be like, oh, severed head, obviously horror. It could, that's a bit gross. It could be something simple, but just the colors could just be, I think that especially with kids' books, you often get a lot of yellows and reds, even with slightly muted, but yellows and reds seem to come up a lot. Nice blues and that. And yes, you do have those in other books. But again, if you look at a lot of books covers, you'll be able to instantly tell just from the color scheme. You'll probably be able to work out, yeah, that's middle grade, that's young child, that's YA. It's just one of those things. So yeah, and you made a good point looking at things, because I think it is important that even though you're going to have a brief, if you're going to go with a designer, they'll probably ask you some questions, or as Rachel said, they'll give you a brief. You have to explain what you're looking for. It's also good for you to look at what is currently popular. And looking back, you can kind of see similarities with popular covers. So if you're a fantasy reader, you'll remember books that may have been high level of detail, that maybe had a scene or a landscape with several characters on the front. Then there was obviously the time when typography was big and like everything was just words. Huge title across the book with maybe a slight background. Maybe it had vines or a door or a wall or cracks or a sword, something like that. You have the ones where it's just a single image, usually on a white or a black background. Crowns were a big thing. Swords, maybe a grave, a hand, a vial, an apple. Looking at Twilight over there. So you doing a little bit of research and looking about what is popular can kind of help you with your brief, So I would recommend, if you're thinking about what you want to design, if you have an idea already, perfect. If you don't, I would personally recommend looking at books in the genre that you write, maybe going back about 2 years. I wouldn't go to any books too far old, too older, because obviously styles change, what's popular changes, and then go through and look at books and see which ones catch your eye, and then figure out why did they catch your eye? What was it that stuck with you? And then, like, is there a pattern? Is it all the typography? Is it all ones where it's bold colors or a single character on the cover? Anything like that. Yes, a cover needs to be attractive to readers, but you are your book's first reader. You wrote it because you loved it, because you wanted to tell the story, you want to read the story. So if it catches your eye, it'll probably catch their eye too. Because remember, they always say, like, well, who's your target audience? You are always your own target audience in some way. I shouldn't say always, because obviously I know there's people who literally just write middle grade books for kids and they don't read it, but you know what I mean. Just let that go. But yeah, so just try and figure out what it is that caught your eye, that made you go, wow, that's the one I'd pick up. And maybe do that with a few, and then look at the patterning all together and see what it is. Because it might be like, wow, the topography on one, the image on the other, the color scheme on the other, anything like that.
And I have to be a Debbie Downer about this real quick, because there is a fine line about looking at what's currently popular and what's currently trending. Obviously, you should do that because, again, if you're writing a book, you want to market it, and that's the way to do it. You got to see what everybody else is doing. However, try not to hop on the trend too far or too much. I guess I don't even know how to explain it, but I got to be brutally honest. I go to Barnes & Noble every week, and the past couple of weeks I've looked in the thrillers and like the psychological thrillers section, and so many of those book covers are the same, because right now the thriller book covers, it's all dark blue, dark purple with bright yellow title font colors. That's a word. And the font style is like the same. It's like not horror-ish. I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about. If you just seriously go on Amazon or Google and type in recently released thrillers, and I guarantee you most of the covers are going to look exactly the same, and it's all dark, and there's like this decrepit house in the background, and it's the yellow font. It's just, they're all the same. And you can even say the same for like romantic comedy right now. They all have that same, like, I don't know what it's called, vector imagery.
Yeah, it's like stylized, these stylized
Yes,
characters.
yeah. And I actually don't mind that. And the thing is, they're different enough, like the books are different enough from each other that you can tell it's a different book. But thrillers right now, they all look exactly the same. And sometimes the cover has like the author's name in like ginormous font that you think that that's the title of the book, and other times it's like really super teeny tiny, and I'm like, I don't know who the author is. But just keep that in mind when you're looking at trends. Try not to make it too similar to other books. As Ari said, you want to make it stand out. So if whatever is currently trending, that obviously must be working. So what can you do to update it or change it slightly just to make it unique enough that other people will look at it and say, "Ooh, this is something different."
100%. Because you made a really good point about how the vector stylized image on certain kinds of romantic books, and is it romantic comedy or just romantic books?
I think lately it's just romance, but like all romance, the whole umbrella.
Yeah. But as you said, they're different enough that you can identify they're different authors, but they're similar enough that as you're sort of glancing through them, the style catches you enough to make you think, oh, yeah, I already like those styles, types of romance. I'm gonna probably like that. I'll go for that. And that's what you want. Whereas, yeah, if you're looking and they're all so similar, you're sat there thinking, is this the same author? You're now lost in a sea. I have to say, it reminded me of the title issue, and we're going to talk about titles a bit later on. When Sarah J. Maas brought her A Court of Thorn and Roses out, so many fantasy books popped up out of the woodworks with a something of something and something. A something of something, and it's like a sword of fire and destiny. I apologize if that is actually somebody's book. I just pulled that out my ass. I am not trying to pick on you if that is your book, but there were so many like that. I'm not even saying that Sarah J. Maas was the first person to do that, because obviously George R.R. Martin is A Song of Fire and Ice. That's his series or first, but I don't know. I never read them. So, but it just became this, like, hers came out and they became really big, and then suddenly so many others came out with the same style of title. I have to admit, every time I saw it, I was kind of like, you know, and they're probably really good books, and maybe they'd already thought of those sorts of titles, but it just had this sense of, it's a bit too similar. And obviously, the cover is worse. If your cover is so similar to everybody else's that you're just lost in the shuffle, that ain't great. And something that Rachel said, author name. Oh, I am 100% with you. Honestly, you're not Stephen King. You don't need to have your name massive on the page. That works when you're a well-known author and the author is the sell rather than the book. People have already gone, wow, you're so great. I already know I'm going to love everything you do. Otherwise, make it smaller. And I'll be honest, and this is my personal opinion, feel free to shoot me down. I freaking hate big names on books. I don't care if you're Stephen King. I don't care if you're, I can't think of any other author. I don't even care if you're Terry Pratchett. I don't want your name massive on the book. I want the title bigger. That's what I want. No, it just overshadows. I always remember it was James Patterson who did his, and I loved his books. And his name was getting bigger and bigger on every book. And sometimes you're trying to find a specific book in the bookshop, and you had to squint to see the title name because it was so tiny compared to his name. It's like, yeah, okay, I know that's his book. Which title is it? So yeah, I hate that.
No, I do too. It drives me nuts, only because the thing is, the only purpose that the author's name is bigger than the title is because the author's name is, it's a big name and they're a bestseller and things like that. So basically, when I see books that have the author name bigger than the book title, what that says to me is that the book cover isn't even trying. It's the book itself isn't even trying. They're not even trying to market it. They're just saying, hey, you love James Patterson? Here's another book. Doesn't matter what it's about or anything like that. It's written by James Patterson. So therefore you must want to read it, right? That's all it tells me. And I'm like, no, just because he wrote it doesn't mean I want to actually read it. Doesn't mean I'll be interested in it. It's just, it sends the wrong message. And I know for some people, they will buy and read any book that their favorite author comes out with, and there's nothing wrong with that. But for me, when they do that stylized choice, I'm just like, you're not even trying. You're using the author's name as a marketing tactic, and I just don't like it.
No, it's very big, obviously, in the traditional publishing sector. They obviously will push the big authors, obviously. But yeah, no, it's just like you're ruining the book cover. Okay, I don't want your name that big. I appreciate you wrote it, and I give you all the props, but stop it. It's just horrid. It's horrible.
But also, on the other hand, you do want people to see your name. And I will say this just as a quick caveat, because when I was doing the cover design process for Apparitions Anonymous, there was one concept that came through. My name was in a good font. It was a good size, but the designer put like a transparency on it. And I think they were going along with the ghost theme. So like I know where they were coming from, but you could barely see my name considering all the other colors on the cover. And I was like, you want people to see your name. Don't make it ginormous, but make it big enough that you're still important. That's all.
Oh yeah, don't hide your name, don't make it tiny. It needs to be a nice size, but just not over the page. But yeah, oh god, yeah, no. Authors deserve the props. But writing the book, it should be clear. I have no way of nicely moving to this. I'm just going to wedge it in. We're going to talk about things like font detail and the types of genre. And yes, I know you're probably sat there going, if I'm going with a designer, they'll do a lot of this. And yes, they might. Not every designer does. Also, if it's a new designer, they might not do this. It's just something that you should also consider just while you're thinking, because obviously they might give you a range of fonts and you might go, oh, that one looks nice because you like that, but it might not fit. In this way, think about like high-level sci-fi that's set in space. It probably won't work as well with some sort of like curly medieval font that you usually find in fantasy. Or thrillers usually have block text. You know, crime and thriller usually has this kind of block text or typewriter style text, that sort of thing. It's not usually all like curls and swirls and twists and things. That's your fantasy. That's your romance, your Renaissance thing. That can be quite important. Placement of text is important. Do you want the title to be large, so it's a powerful title? Is it going to cover up a large part of the main cover? Is the cover image more important, so you're going to shrink it down? Have you got a lot of text to include? We'll talk about that later. But there are other things in the title and the author's name that you might want to include, so you might have to think about that. And you might want to think about that again before you do your brief. That way the designer knows what they're working with size-wise. Same with what the cover portrays. You know, what does the cover image that you have in mind say? Is it some sort of weird, obscure reference deep within the book that no one's going to get and no one's going to want to pick up the book because it doesn't make any sense? Now, obviously that can work. I'm not saying it needs to be so on the nose. We're not saying, oh my gosh, you need to have blood dripping down the book for horror. But at the same time, you don't have to do that. But don't maybe have a really cute, loving animal like that we would see on like a middle grade book in a horror, because people might not realize it's a horror. Even if you're like, well, that dog's really important later on. You got to be careful with that. If that dog's not massively part of the plot and it's just a little side thing, that's not going to work.
Yeah, I think I mentioned it earlier that a picture is worth 1,000 words. So when it comes to creating your cover, you want to make sure that it portrays something that has to do with the book so that your readers can know what they're getting into. And I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before, and I genuinely cannot remember the author or the book title. I apologize. But there was a book that I had received for a review a long time ago, and it was a mystery, and the book cover was of a boat on a dock of like a lake. There was no boat. There was no lake. There was not like that setting wasn't even in the book at all. It had nothing to do with boats, anything. So I don't know why the author chose that cover. It was a nice cover, don't get me wrong, but again, it had nothing to do with the book. So it was kind of like, why? What was your thought process behind this? So just keep that in mind as well. You want to make sure that when people pick up your book, they look at the different features of the cover and they say, "Ooh, there's going to be magic, there's going to be sparkles, there's going to be cats, like whatever." It's supposed to excite them, make them want to read it.
Yeah, that reminds me of the one again. I probably said it too. Of the traditional published book series that I've got, where the front cover image of it is of this woman, but she's not the main character, because I have assumed that they didn't like the fact that the main character, to sort of hide from the people who are chasing her, she dyed her hair this weird orange color, like orange, not ginger, not red, orange. And then there's another character who's got hair that goes streaks of red or green or black whenever she's expressing emotions. It curls and it changes color. And the front cover is of this girl with red streaks. And it's like, yeah, that's not the main character. And obviously maybe they thought, yeah, bright orange hair is going to look weird. But every time I read it, I get annoyed that the character on the front isn't the right character. It just doesn't, the hair's not right. It's like, that's not what she looks like. So even traditional publishers will do it just to fit in with the look. And it's like, no, I'm not impressed. Don't like it.
It's misleading, and I don't like that.
Exactly. Exactly. So I think it comes down to you need to work with the designer. Maybe you have an idea maybe you have a clear idea of what you sort of want on your cover, and maybe you don't. And there are a lot of designers who are fine with that. Obviously, they might ask you like, what is it about? Who's the main character? They might ask you things to kind of get an idea. And if you say, I have no idea what to put on, but it's a fantasy, it's for adults, that I've got a male and female protagonist, they've got a castle, there's a river, there's a love story, then, and I like these color tones, the designer might be able to make something for you. Obviously, if you have an idea, that can help just to sort of work with them, which is why I think doing a little bit of research on book covers can help as well, especially if you're struggling and have no ideas. So just out of curiosity, Rachel, when you were doing yours, did you have an idea for what the cover was going to look like, or did you have just a really vague, like, yeah, I want this sort of, it's like a ghostly story, but it's at this age and this, sort of style? How did you feel when you were creating yours?
I had zero ideas of what I wanted it to look like. But the great thing about 99 Designs is that it walks you through the whole process of the brief, because it's under the impression that you are not a graphic designer at all. So at one point in the brief, it'll give you a whole slew of different book covers that designers have made on the website or through the website already. And it'll ask you to pick at least 3 of the styles that you like. To use as an example for the designers, you can add those to your brief and say, hey, I like the look of this. And there's a comment box. You can say, I like the look of this because I like how the colors are. I like this particular font, so on and so on. And there's also another part of the brief where it asks what style you want, and it'll has like the little slider bar. So it's like, do you want it to look more retro, or do you want it to look more modern? Do you want it to look like more vivid, or do you want it to look more dull, like the color schemes, whatever. So it walks you through that process. And it's one of the reasons why I chose 99 Designs, because yeah, I had zero idea. I didn't know what I wanted the cover to look like at all. So I was like, I'll just fill it out. And as the designers bring in concepts, then I get more ideas, and I could say, I like this, but could you try this? Could you try that? And it's a wonderful process. If anybody has used 99 Designs, like it's great.
Yeah, we'll definitely make sure to put the website down in the description, because I think people would like to try that. So it does sound like a really good way of doing it. And I think having that sort of almost like hand-holding, stepping you through, because I said, I have no idea what my book cover designs are going to look like. I know a lot of people are like, oh yeah, I've got the image of the idea of the book, and then I'm going to write it, or even like halfway through, I got the image of no idea. Zero.
Yeah, I have trouble picturing things in my head as well. And I think that's part of my problem, is why I'm like, I don't know what the cover is going to look like, because I don't even know what Apparitions Anonymous is set in a void. I'm like, what do you do with that? I literally gave them a brief and I was like, here's a pile of nothing. Please make something out of it. And the person that I went with did, and I am super duper impressed.
I love that. It was in the void, just a black cover, nothing else. It's gone. Okay, just quite a few things you might want to consider adding. And we've talked about them before. I don't care. We want to drill this home. If it's a series, put the series title somewhere on your cover. Small text underneath your title, fine. If it's a series, put the book number somewhere. Whether it's on the front, whether it's on the spine, just put it somewhere. Seriously. If you have a tagline, a really strong tagline that might grab people, put that on the front cover. Other things you might want to add, if you have a one-line really good review, put that on. If you're an award-winning author, did you become a New York best-selling author from another book? Put that above or below your name. That's kind of useful. But again, you have to think about whether things will fit. I would let the designer know, these are the things I'd like to fit on the book cover, because it might make a big difference with how they shift things around. Something we did mention earlier is you can also use pre-made book covers. So these are where designers have come up with a load of different designs. Their portfolios are usually on their website or even on social media. And then if you like it, you can then buy the design and they will put sold across it, and that is your design. And it's usually where you might be able to make small changes, obviously, to the title. maybe to the font or some sort of color, but you won't have much chance to make bigger changes because the whole point is it's pre-made, which means you save on money because a designer doesn't have to do anything more intense than what they've already created, but you can still find some that are quite good for your genre, and they can work out quite nicely. If I find any, I think I have a list of some of those I was looking at, so I'll try and remember to put those links in the description. And obviously, before you buy anything like that, always check with the designer what they are willing to change. It might literally be you can change the title to what your title is. That's it. So be aware of those sorts of changes. And if there's any extra changes, there might be extra charges. So just keep aware of that. But it can be quite a good cost-effective option. And also, if you do use a pre-made design with a designer and you have a series, because you've picked that design, they might be able to then recreate that similarity for the rest of your series. But again, you might want to double check that they're okay to do that they have the capacity for that. You don't want to start with a couple of pre-made book covers and then the designers stop doing pre-mades, or maybe they stop designing. I suppose that could happen with anyone. The designer could suddenly stop. So yeah. Okay, I'm going to stop now.
I just want to add one last quick thing, that when working with a designer, obviously before you finalize everything, you can do a once over and really like zero in on the cover and make sure that everything is up to speed. And one thing I just want to point out is that when looking over your book cover, don't just look at the overall design and the color scheme and the font style and things like that. Make sure everything is spelled correctly, because typos happen. And that was something I did not do when I got my Apparitions Anonymous cover. I just looked at it and I was like, wow, this is great. And then when I was like creating social media images and stuff for it, I spelled apparitions wrong because I can't spell that word despite it being my title. And in that one little moment, I was like, crap, is it spelled wrong on the book cover? And I gave myself a heart attack. Everything was spelled correctly, but I had already like finalized the cover, paid the designer, like, and seriously, like a week or two later, that's when I was like, wait, are there typos on the book cover? So just throwing that out there as well. When you're like, even after the designing is all done, you're still not done. Like you really need to like focus and look at your book and make sure everything is what you want, all the information is correct, and everything is spelled correctly. Doesn't really have anything to do about, you know, what to consider when designing, but I just had to throw that in there anyway.
Oh no, I think that's important because it's one of those things you probably wouldn't think of, because it's like it could be something that you wrote in the brief, like this is the title and you could have spelt it wrong, or it could be that they made a mistake when they were doing it, because you know people are human. We make mistakes, they make mistakes, no issue. So yeah, and as you said, you don't want to have had everything finalized, got it all ready, and then be like, oh, spelling error. Like, no.
And I say that because that happened to Rick Riordan. The new edition of Son of Neptune came out in 2024, and the hardcover jacket, that they spelled Olympus wrong on the back blurb.
No. Oh my gosh.
So it happens.
Seriously.
It happens to the best of us.
Yep. Yeah, I think it comes down to like in the end, it's your book, it's your work. So you have to be like on point as much as you can. Yeah, things will slip through, whether it's your mistake or someone else's. But if you can like make mistakes, like check spelling on everything. Tick, done. Okay, I have nothing else to add. I know that was a lot of information. You were probably thinking, well, my designer would just be able to deal with everything. But honestly, I think it can help just to give you an idea of what you might want to think about while you're getting a designer to do it, or if you've decided you want to make your own covers or want to do design. I don't know. As I said, we do believe that you should go with someone who has done design. But hey, each to their own. Do what you want. Before we leave, if you want to learn more about us, the podcast, and opportunities to be a guest on the show, don't forget to check out our website at themerrywriterpodcast.podbean.com. Now we'll turn it over to you guys. What things do you consider when planning your book covers? Let us know your answers in the comments so we can chat about it. Remember, we do release new episodes every Wednesday. Next week, we're discussing hands-on novel research. To ensure you don't miss it, hit the subscribe button on your way out. And as always, thanks for listening to the Merry Writer Podcast. We'll see you next week. This podcast is brought to you by Scraps of Paper. We have notes everywhere. The music titled Inspired is by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons 4.0.